Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house in suburban Denver. Extended family gathered around the mahogany table my grandfather built. Dad carving the turkey when my cousin Jake mentions my recent job layoff from the marketing firm. Dad stops mid-slice, looks directly at me with cold eyes, and announces to everyone, Arlo has always been dead weight in this family. Some people contribute, others just take. The room falls silent. Forks pause midway to mouths. I don't argue or defend myself. Instead, I ask one simple question that makes Mom drop her fork entirely. Why did you tell everyone I graduated from Colorado State with honors when I actually dropped out sophomore year? The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Complete silence descended upon our dining room, broken only by the sound of Mom's fork clattering against her bone china plate. Aunt Sarah, who had been sipping her second glass of Merlot, choked and grabbed her napkin. Dad's face drained of all color, his carving knife frozen halfway through the turkey breast. Uncle Mark set down his water glass slowly, his surgeon's steady hands suddenly trembling. Cousin Emma, home from her pre-med studies at University of Colorado Boulder, stared at me with wide eyes. Jake's mouth fell open, revealing half-chewed stuffing. What did you just say? Grandmother Alice's voice cut through the tension like a blade. At 89 years old, she commanded respect from everyone in our family, and her sharp blue eyes now focused on me with laser intensity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 6 years of deception pressing down on my chest. I found the forged graduation certificate last month when I was helping Mom organize documents in the basement. Dad created it himself using Photoshop and printed it on fancy paper to show you all. The revelation hit the table like a meteor striking Earth. Uncle Richard, Dad's older brother and a federal judge, leaned forward with the same expression he probably wore when hearing shocking testimony in his courtroom. Daniel, is this true? Dad's hands began to shake visibly. The carving knife slipped from his grasp, landing with a metallic clang on the serving platter. Gravy splattered across the white tablecloth like blood drops at a crime scene. I can explain, Dad stammered, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. Can you? I continued, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. Can you explain why you told Uncle Mark that I was working on a major campaign for a Fortune 500 company when I've been unemployed for 3 months? Can you explain why you showed Aunt Linda my supposed Employee of the Month certificate when I made it myself as a joke? Mom's breathing became shallow and rapid. She pressed her hand to her chest, her wedding ring catching the light from the crystal chandelier above us. Arlo, please. No, Mom. I'm tired of protecting his lies. I turned to address the entire table. For 6 years, Dad has been creating an entire fictional version of my life. Every holiday gathering, every family barbecue, every phone call with relatives has been built on stories that never happened. Jake found his voice first. But you told me about your promotion to senior marketing manager just last summer. You said you were making $75,000 a year. I was working at Target stocking shelves for $11 an hour, I replied. Dad made up the promotion story because Uncle Richard mentioned that his son got a raise. Uncle Richard's face hardened. As the eldest of the 3 brothers, he had always been competitive about his children's achievements. Daniel, what the hell have you been doing? Dad's composure completely cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool November air conditioning through the house. You don't understand the pressure. Richard's kid is a doctor. Mark's daughter is studying medicine. Everyone expects success. So you decided to fabricate it. Aunt Sarah's voice rose an octave. You made us all believe Arlo was this accomplished young professional. I felt a strange sense of liberation as the truth finally emerged. He told you I bought him that expensive Rolex for Father's Day, didn't he? Mom bought that watch herself and put my name on the card because Dad insisted family needed to think I was doing well enough to afford luxury gifts. Mom's tears started flowing freely now. She had been Dad's accomplice in these deceptions, and the shame was written across her face like a confession letter. "We thought it would just be temporary," she whispered, "until you got back on your feet. 6 years, Mom. 6 years of lies." I looked around the table at my extended family, people who had praised me for achievements that existed only in Dad's imagination. How many times did you brag to your friends about your successful nephew, Uncle Mark? How many times did you compare your own children to my supposed accomplishments? Aunt Linda, Shasadas. Grandmother Alice's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. All those stories about your business trips to Seattle, the company car, the apartment downtown. Fiction, all of it. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I've been living in the basement here, sleeping on a futon, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life after dropping out of college. While Dad was spinning tales about my corner office with a view of the mountains, I was applying for entry-level positions and getting rejected because I don't have a degree. The room erupted in chaos. Cousin Emma burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Jake pushed back from the table so hard his chair nearly tipped over. Uncle Mark stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. 6 years of lies. Daniel, Uncle Mark's voice boomed. 6 years of making us believe your son was thriving when he was actually struggling. Dad looked like a cornered animal. His eyes darted around the table, searching for an ally but finding only shocked faces and disappointed expressions. I was protecting him. I was protecting our family's reputation. By building it on lies, Grandmother Alice's voice carried the weight of decades of family leadership. Your father. My husband William would be ashamed of this deception. The comparison to Grandfather William hit Dad like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, knocking into the china cabinet behind him. The antique dishes rattled ominously. You destroyed your own son's credibility, Uncle Richard said, his judge's voice cutting through the noise. How are we supposed to trust anything you've told us about anything? I felt a surge of vindication mixed with sadness. These were the same relatives who had treated me with special warmth because of my supposed achievements, who had asked for my advice about career moves, who had used my fictional success as motivation for their own children. Now they realized they had been emotionally manipulated by someone they trusted. The worst part, I said quietly, causing everyone to stop talking and listen, is that while you all thought I was this confident, successful person, I was actually drowning. I needed help, support, maybe just someone to talk to about real struggles. Instead, I had to pretend everything was perfect because Dad needed to maintain his fantasy. Aunt Linda wiped her eyes with her napkin. Arlo, honey, if we had known, you would have what actually cared about the real me instead of the fiction Dad created. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Dad finally found his voice again, but it came out as a desperate plea. I was trying to give you time to recover. I thought if family believed you were successful, you'd feel less pressure while you figured things out. You weren't protecting me, Dad. You were protecting yourself from the embarrassment of having a son who struggled. Mom's breakdown began with a single sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Her shoulders shook as 6 years of carefully maintained deceptions finally overwhelmed her. She buried her face in her hands and her voice came out muffled and broken. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Arlo. I should have stopped this years ago, but I was scared. She looked up at the table full of shocked relatives' mascara, creating dark trails down her cheeks. Daniel convinced me we were protecting Arlo's dignity, but we were really just protecting ourselves from judgment. The admission hit the family like a second earthquake. Grandmother Alice, who had always praised Mom for raising such a successful grandson, stared at her daughter-in-law with a mixture of disappointment and pity. You helped perpetuate this. Uncle Richard's prosecutorial instincts kicked in. Susan, you actively participated in lying to your own family for 6 years. Mom nodded miserably. Every time someone called to congratulate Arlo on another promotion, every time you asked about his apartment or his job, I had to remember which lie Daniel had told to whom. I kept notes in my phone so our stories would match. She pulled out her iPhone with shaking hands and scrolled through what appeared to be an extensive list. Here, C told Mark that Arlo got Employee of the Month in June. Told Linda he's dating a nurse named Ashley who works at Presbyterian St. Joseph. Told Alice he's considering buying a condo in Cherry Creek. Jake grabbed the phone from her hands and read aloud. Told Richard that Arlo is mentoring new hires at his company. Told Sarah he's planning a vacation to Hawaii with his promotion bonus. His voice grew louder with each fabricated detail. Jesus, there are dozens of these. Uncle Mark sank back into his chair heavily. As a neurosurgeon at National Jewish Health, he was accustomed to dealing with life and death situations with clinical precision. But this emotional manipulation left him visibly shaken. I bragged about Arlo to my colleagues, he said quietly. I told them my nephew was this marketing prodigy who was climbing the corporate ladder faster than anyone his age. I used his supposed success as an example when counseling my residents about career development. Aunt Linda's face had gone pale. I pushed Emma harder in school because I thought Arlo had set such a high bar for the cousins. I told her she needed to match his work ethic and ambition. Emma, who had idolized me throughout her teenage years, looked devastated. You mean all those times I felt inadequate compared to Cousin Arlo's achievements? I was comparing myself to stories. Not just stories, I said gently. Lies designed to make your uncle feel better about himself. Dad seemed to shrink physically with each revelation. The commanding presence he usually maintained at family gatherings evaporated, leaving behind a middle-aged man whose carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely. Daniel. Grandmother Alice's voice carried the authority of someone who had raised 3 sons and buried a husband. Explain to me how you justified this deception to yourself. Dad's response came out as barely more than a whisper. Richard's son graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School. Mark's daughter is at Johns Hopkins. When we get together, all anyone talks about are their children's accomplishments. I couldn't bear to admit that my son had dropped out. So, you invented an entire successful career instead. Uncle Richard's anger was palpable. You made us unknowing participants in your psychological manipulation. The weight of complicity settled over the entire table. Each family member began to realize how they had been used as unwitting actors in Dad's elaborate performance. Cousin Jake, who had always felt overshadowed by my supposed achievements, stood up abruptly. Do you have any idea how inadequate you made me feel? Every family gathering, every phone call, I had to hear about Arlo's latest promotion or accomplishment while I was struggling to find my footing after college. That wasn't intentional, Dad protested weakly. Wasn't it? Jake's voice cracked with emotion. You used your fake stories about Arlo to diminish everyone else's real achievements. When I got my first job as a bank teller, you said it was a good start, but Arlo was already managing major accounts at his age. That crushed me, Daniel. I thought I was falling behind my own cousin. Aunt Sarah gathered her purse and stood up, her movements sharp with anger. I need to leave before I say something I'll regret. Daniel, you've manipulated this entire family's emotional dynamics for years. This isn't just about lying. This is about psychological abuse. Sarah, please. Dad reached out toward his sister-in-law, but she stepped back. No. You made us all complicit in hurting Arlo by praising him for things he never did, instead of supporting him through whatever he was actually experiencing. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Arlo, I'm sorry we failed you. If we had known you were struggling, we would have helped. Uncle Mark stood up as well, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I can't process this right now. Susan, Arlo, you're welcome at our house anytime. Daniel, you need professional help. As family members began gathering their coats and purses, the Thanksgiving celebration disintegrated into the worst family crisis anyone could remember. The turkey sat half-carved on the serving platter, surrounded by side dishes that had grown cold, while our family's foundation cracked apart. Grandmother Alice remained seated, her weathered hands folded in her lap. She studied Dad with the same expression she might use to examine a stranger who had wandered into her home uninvited. Your father, William and I raised you to value honesty above all else, she said quietly. We taught you that integrity was the foundation of character. How did you stray so far from those values? Dad collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. I don't know, Mom. It started small. When Arlo first dropped out, I told Richard he was taking a gap year. Then, when you asked about his studies, I said he was doing well. Each lie led to another one, and before I knew it, I had created this entire alternate reality. A reality that hurt your own son, she replied. While you were busy protecting your pride, Arlo was suffering in silence, unable to ask for help, because you needed everyone to believe he was thriving. The truth of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I had indeed been struggling in isolation, partly because Dad's fictional version of my life made it impossible for me to admit how much I was actually failing. I wanted to tell you all the truth so many times, I said, addressing the family members who remained. But Dad always said it would destroy our family's reputation. He said people would think less of all of us if they knew I had dropped out and couldn't find stable work. So instead, he made us think less of ourselves by comparison to your fabricated success, Emma said bitterly. That's not protection. That's manipulation. As the evening collapsed around us, I felt simultaneously devastated and relieved. The truth was finally emerging after years of carefully maintained lies, but the cost was the destruction of family relationships that had been built on false foundations. Dad sat alone at the head of the table, surrounded by the wreckage of his deceptions, while I wondered if our family would ever recover from the damage his pride had inflicted on all of us. The silence that followed Emma's words felt different from the shocked quiet that had greeted my initial revelation. This silence carried weight like the moments before a dam bursts. I looked around at the faces of my family members, people I loved despite everything, and realized they deserved to understand not just what Dad had lied about, but why those lies had been necessary in the first place. There's more to this story, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The reason I dropped out wasn't because I was lazy or unmotivated. Dad's gambling addiction drained my entire college fund during my sophomore year. If the earlier revelations had been earthquakes, this was a nuclear bomb. Mom's face went white as copy paper. Dad jerked as if he'd been electrocuted. Uncle Richard, who had been preparing to leave, stopped putting on his coat and slowly turned back toward the table. Gambling addiction. Grandmother Alice's voice carried a new kind of horror. Daniel, what is Arlo talking about? I had kept this secret for 6 years, protecting Dad's reputation, even as he destroyed mine. But watching him call me dead weight in front of our entire family had finally broken whatever loyalty had kept me silent. Scratch off lottery tickets at first, I began, my voice growing stronger as the truth poured out. Then slot machines at the casino in Black Hawk, then online poker. By spring semester of my sophomore year, the $28,000 Mom and Dad had saved for my education was completely gone. Uncle Mark sat back down heavily, his medical bag sliding off his shoulder onto the floor. $28,000? Gone in 8 months, I continued. I came home for spring break to find Dad passed out at this very table with losing lottery tickets scattered everywhere and 3 empty beer bottles next to his laptop, which was still logged into an online poker site showing a negative balance. Mom began crying again, but these tears were different. These were tears of recognition, of secrets finally being exposed to daylight. I tried to wake him up. I said the memory still vivid and painful. When he finally came to, he looked at me with these bloodshot eyes and said, "Don't tell your mother about the college money. We'll figure something else out." But there was nothing else to figure out. The money was gone, and tuition for the next semester was due in 3 weeks. Aunt Linda covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, Arlo, why didn't you tell us?" Because Dad begged me not to. He promised he would get help stop gambling, find a way to pay for school. He said if family found out about his problem, it would destroy Mom's health and ruin his relationship with all of you. The irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Dad had been so concerned about protecting his reputation that he had sacrificed his son's education and then lied about it for years. "So, what did you do?" Uncle Richard asked, his judge's instincts compelling him to gather all the facts. "I took out student loans to cover the rest of sophomore year, but they weren't enough for junior year. I had to drop out and get a job to help save our house from foreclosure." The room reacted with sharp intakes of breath. Cousin Jake looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Foreclosure. Dad's gambling debts weren't just the college fund, I explained. He had taken cash advances on multiple credit cards, borrowed against his retirement account, even missed several mortgage payments. While you all thought I was pursuing exciting marketing opportunities, I was actually working 3 jobs to keep us from losing this house. I gestured around the dining room where we sat with its hardwood floors and custom built-ins that Grandfather William had crafted by hand. Overnight shifts at a warehouse in Commerce City, delivering pizzas for Mario's on weekends and cleaning offices downtown from 5 to 8 a.m. before most people were even awake. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. "While I was complaining about organic chemistry homework, you were working 3 jobs. 16-hour days, sometimes 18 during busy periods. I'd come home at 3 in the morning, exhausted and covered in warehouse dust, to find Dad either passed out drunk or wide awake at his computer, trying to win back money he'd lost earlier that day." Uncle Mark, who had always been the family's voice of medical reason, looked at Dad with a mixture of professional concern and personal disgust. "Daniel, gambling addiction is a recognized psychological disorder. There are treatment programs, support groups, medical interventions. Why didn't you get help?" Dad's response came out as a barely audible mumble. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could win back what I'd lost." "Instead, you lost more," I said. "By Christmas of my sophomore year, you owed $43,000 in credit card debt, plus the college fund, plus back mortgage payments. Mom was taking anxiety medication because she couldn't understand why our bills kept growing even though you supposedly had steady income." Mom's tears had evolved into quiet sobs. I knew something was wrong, but every time I asked questions, Daniel got angry and accused me of not trusting him. He was hiding bank statements, intercepting credit card bills, even lying about his work schedule to cover gambling trips. I continued. I found a second cell phone hidden in his dresser drawer with text messages from loan sharks threatening physical violence if he didn't pay up. Grandmother Alice, who had lived through the Great Depression and understood financial hardship better than anyone, spoke with quiet fury. "You put your family in danger with violent criminals." "It wasn't supposed to get that bad," Dad protested weakly. "But it did get that bad," I replied. "It got so bad that I had to take out a personal loan from my girlfriend Ashley just to make the January mortgage payment. She emptied her savings account to keep us from being evicted, and I've been paying her back $25 at a time ever since." Jake stood up and began pacing behind his chair. "Let me get this straight. While Uncle Daniel was telling everyone that Arlo was this successful marketing professional, Arlo was actually sacrificing his education and working multiple minimum wage jobs to save the family home from his father's gambling debts." "That's exactly right," I confirmed. "Shoo." And then Dad created elaborate stories about my supposed career success to cover up the fact that his addiction had destroyed my future. Uncle Richard's legal mind was processing the full scope of the deception. "Daniel, you didn't just lie about Arlo's achievements. You created a fictional narrative to hide your own financial crimes against your family." "They weren't crimes," Dad protested. "Stealing your son's college fund is absolutely a crime," Uncle Richard shot back. "Using money designated for education to fuel a gambling addiction is a betrayal of the worst kind." Aunt Sarah, who had been quietly listening while putting on her coat, turned back toward the table. "Daniel, do you understand what you did to this boy? You took away his education, forced him into exhausting manual labor, and then prevented him from getting family support by lying about his circumstances." The weight of her words seemed to physically push Dad deeper into his chair. For 6 years, he had managed to avoid confronting the full consequences of his actions by maintaining his fictional narrative. Now, with the truth exposed, there was nowhere left to hide. "I was ashamed," he finally admitted. I couldn't bear for anyone to know how badly I had failed as a father. So, you made Arlo carry the burden of your shame, Grandmother Alice said quietly. While you received praise for raising a successful son, he was working himself to exhaustion to clean up your mistakes. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The truth was finally out, but it had cost us our family's foundation. Everyone now understood that Dad's gambling hadn't just hurt me financially, it had created a web of lies that poisoned our relationships with everyone we loved. The worst part, I said looking directly at Dad, was listening to you criticize me for being unmotivated or lazy when you knew I was working myself sick to fix problems you created. The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet carried understanding rather than shock. My family finally knew the real story behind 6 years of carefully crafted deceptions. Dad's face transformed into something I barely recognized. The shame and defeat that had marked his expression moments earlier vanished, replaced by a rage that made the veins in his neck bulge like ropes under tension. He shot to his feet so violently that his chair toppled backward, crashing into the china cabinet with a sound like breaking bones. "You little bastard," he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "You're destroying this family. Everything I did was to protect us, and you're throwing it all away out of spite." The sudden explosion of violence shocked everyone into stunned silence. Mom pressed herself back against her chair as if trying to disappear. Grandmother Alice gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles. But it was Uncle Richard who moved first, rising from his seat with the controlled authority of someone accustomed to maintaining order in chaotic situations. "Daniel, sit down," Uncle Richard commanded, stepping between Dad and me. "Control yourself." But Dad was beyond rational thought. The mask of respectability he had worn for decades had finally slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "He's vindictive. He's selfish. He's making us all look like fools." "You made yourself look like a fool," I replied evenly, though my heart was pounding. "I'm just telling the truth you were too cowardly to tell." Dad lunged toward me, his face purple with rage, but Uncle Richard caught him by the shoulders and physically restrained him. "That's enough. This is not how we handle family problems. Let me go." Dad struggled against his older brother's grip. "He has no right to humiliate us like this. He has every right to defend himself against your lies," Uncle Mark said, moving to help Richard contain Dad's outburst. And frankly, this aggressive behavior explains a lot about why he kept quiet for so long. Mom found her voice for the first time since Dad's explosion began. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly, but her words cut through the chaos like a knife. "Daniel's temper has been getting worse for months." The admission hit the room like cold water. Dad stopped struggling against his brothers and stared at Mom with an expression of betrayal and panic. "Susan, don't," he warned, but there was desperation rather than authority in his voice. "No, Daniel. They need to know." Mom straightened in her chair, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside herself. "Last month, when Arlo couldn't give you money for your gambling debts, you threw a coffee mug at the wall next to his head. It shattered into pieces, and some of the ceramic cut his cheek." Aunt Linda gasped audibly. Jake's eyes widened with shock, but it was Grandmother Alice's reaction that carried the most weight. She looked at Dad with an expression of such profound disappointment that he seemed to physically shrink under her gaze. "You became physically violent with your own son," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like that," Dad protested weakly. "I was frustrated. He was being stubborn about helping with bills." "Bills that existed because of your gambling," I clarified. "You wanted me to give you $300 from my paycheck so you could pay the minimum balance on a credit card you'd maxed out at the casino." Ashley, my girlfriend, had witnessed that particular incident. She had been visiting when Dad's rage exploded over my refusal to enable his addiction further. The memory of her face pale with shock and fear still haunted me. "Ashley saw the whole thing," I continued. "She begged me to leave that night, said it wasn't safe for me to stay here anymore. but I couldn't abandon Mom to deal with your anger alone." Mom began crying again, but these tears carried a different quality. They seemed to wash away years of accumulated fear and silence. I've been walking on eggshells for months, never knowing what might set him off. The gambling losses, the bill collectors calling the lies, getting more complicated, everything made him angrier. See, Uncle Mark's medical training kicked in as he studied Dad with clinical assessment. "Daniel, have you been drinking more heavily, using any substances to cope with stress?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Dad's drinking had indeed increased along with his gambling, creating a dangerous combination of poor judgment and explosive temper. Some nights I'd find him passed out at the kitchen table with empty bourbon bottles and gambling websites still open on his laptop, I said. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, confused and angry, demanding to know why I was awake. Cousin Emma, who had idolized our family dynamic throughout her teenage years, looked devastated by these revelations. "Uncle Daniel, I thought you were the most stable adult in our family. You always seemed so confident and in control." "He's been performing," I replied. "The confident father, the successful provider. The family leader, all of it was an act to hide his gambling addiction and the financial chaos it created." Jake, who had stopped pacing and was now gripping the back of his chair like an anchor, spoke with quiet intensity. "How long has this been going on?" "The violence, I mean." Mom and I exchanged glances. We had both been victims of Dad's increasing volatility, but we had hidden it from family just as effectively as Dad had hidden his gambling. "The first time he threw something was about 2 years ago," Mom said hesitantly. "A plate that missed me but broke against the refrigerator. He apologized afterward, said the stress was getting to him." "But it got worse," I added, "especially after gambling losses. He'd come home angry and take it out on whoever was available. Mom started staying in the bedroom when he got home from the casino." Grandmother Alice stood up slowly, her 89-year-old frame somehow radiating more authority than anyone else in the room. "Daniel William Patterson," she said, using Dad's full name like she had when he was a child, caught misbehaving. "Your father would be ashamed of the man you've become." The comparison to Grandfather William hit Dad like a physical blow. He had worshipped his father, a man who had built furniture with his hands and never raised his voice to his family. The contrast between that legacy and Dad's current behavior was devastating. "Don't you dare bring Dad into this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "William never gambled away his family's security," she replied firmly. "He never lied to his relatives, and he certainly never raised his hand in anger toward his wife or children." The truth of her words hung in the air like an indictment. Dad had violated every principle his father had tried to instill in him. Uncle Richard, still maintaining his physical position between Dad and the rest of the family, spoke with the authority of decades on the federal bench. "Daniel, you need professional intervention. This isn't just about gambling anymore. You're exhibiting patterns of domestic violence and financial abuse." "I never hit anyone," Dad protested. "Throwing objects, creating fear, using intimidation, those are forms of violence," Uncle Mark explained with medical precision. "And using Arlo's college fund for gambling, then forcing him to work multiple jobs to cover your debts constitutes financial abuse." The clinical terminology seemed to shock Dad into a moment of clarity. But for the first time since his outburst began, he looked around the room and seemed to recognize the devastation he had caused. But the damage was already done. Family members who had respected and trusted him now saw him as someone capable of violence against his own family. The evening that had begun as a traditional Thanksgiving celebration had become a reckoning that would change our family dynamics forever. As Dad stood there, held back by his brothers and condemned by his mother, I realized that my decision to tell the truth had set in motion consequences none of us had anticipated. The family we had all known was gone, replaced by a new reality where Dad's true nature was finally visible to everyone. 3 days after our disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, my phone rang while I was walking through the frozen food section at King Soopers. trying to figure out what someone with $7.34 could eat for the rest of the week. Uncle Richard's name appeared on my screen, and I hesitated before answering. I expected anger, disappointment, maybe a lecture about airing family problems in public. Instead, his voice carried a warmth I hadn't anticipated. Arlo, I've been thinking about everything you said Thursday night. Could we meet for coffee this morning? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. An hour later, I sat across from Uncle Richard at a small cafe in downtown Denver, nursing a cup of black coffee I couldn't really afford while he studied me with the same intense focus he probably used when reviewing complex legal cases. I want to apologize, he began, which caught me completely off guard. As a federal judge, I see patterns of family manipulation and financial abuse in my courtroom regularly. I should have recognized the signs in my own family. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. More importantly, I want to offer you something concrete. My law firm needs a paralegal, someone who can start immediately and work flexible hours. The position pays $18 an hour with health benefits and tuition assistance for employees who want to pursue legal education. I stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate pity gesture. Uncle Richard, I appreciate the thought, but I don't want charity disguised as employment. This isn't charity, he replied firmly. I've watched you handle impossible circumstances with more maturity and integrity than most adults I know. Your attention to detail, your ability to maintain composure under pressure, your work ethic, these are exactly the qualities we need in our office. He slid a business card across the table. The position comes with real responsibilities and real opportunities for advancement. If you're interested in law school, eventually working as a paralegal would give you invaluable experience and help you build relationships with professors and legal professionals. For the first time in years, someone was offering me a genuine opportunity based on my actual abilities rather than fictional achievements Dad had created. The possibility felt almost too good to be real. There's something else, Uncle Richard continued. I've been researching gambling addiction and its impact on families. What your father did stealing your education fund, forcing you to work multiple jobs, creating financial dependency, these are recognized patterns of abuse. You're entitled to legal remedies, including restitution. That afternoon brought another unexpected visitor. Grandmother Alice arrived at our front door carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression of determined resolve that I hadn't seen since Grandfather William's funeral. "Is your father home?" she asked as I invited her into the living room. "He's at work," I replied, though I wasn't entirely certain that was true. Dad's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable since our family confrontation. She settled into his favorite chair with deliberate symbolism and opened the envelope. "Good. This conversation is between you, me, and your mother." Mom emerged from the kitchen, her movements cautious and uncertain. The past few days had been difficult for both of us as we navigated the aftermath of finally telling the truth about our family situation. "Arlo," Grandmother Alice began, "I've been investigating your father's gambling through my financial advisor. The situation is worse than any of us imagined." She pulled out several documents that looked like credit reports and bank statements. "Daniel currently owes $67,000 in credit card debt, most of it from cash advances taken at casinos. He's also borrowed against his retirement account and taken out a second mortgage on this house that you and Susan knew nothing about." Mom's face went white. "A second mortgage. $17,000 borrowed 8 months ago and already spent," Grandmother Alice confirmed. "But more concerning, he owes significant money to private lenders who aren't regulated banking institutions. The implications hit me like ice water. Loan sharks. People who charge interest rates that would make credit card companies blush," she confirmed. "My financial advisor has contacts in debt recovery and he's concerned about your family's physical safety." Mom sank onto the couch as if her legs had given out. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm going to make you both an offer," Grandmother Alice replied. "Arlo, I want to pay for you to finish your degree through an accelerated program. Online classes, evening schedules, Whatever works with your new job at Richard's firm. She turned to Mom. Susan, I'm prepared to help you establish financial independence from Daniel. My attorney can help you protect your assets and create legal separation if necessary. The generosity overwhelmed me, but I had learned to be cautious about offers that seemed too good to be true. Grandmother Alice, I can't let you solve problems that Dad created. You're not letting me do anything, she replied with steel in her voice. I'm choosing to invest in family members who deserve support instead of enabling someone who has betrayed our trust. Mom found her voice. What about Daniel? What about trying to help him get treatment? Treatment will only work if he wants to get better, Grandmother Alice said bluntly. Right now, he's more concerned with avoiding consequences than addressing his behavior. As if summoned by our conversation, Ashley arrived for her planned visit. She had been my anchor through the worst periods of Dad's gambling addiction, providing emotional support and even financial assistance when our family was facing foreclosure. I brought something, she announced, carrying a folder that looked suspiciously official. I've been researching accelerated degree programs and I found something perfect. She spread brochures and application materials across the coffee table. Colorado State University Global offers a bachelor's degree completion program designed for working adults. You can finish your remaining 60 credit hours in 18 months while working full-time. The emotion in her voice became evident as she continued. I've been saving money for our future together and I want to use it to pay for your education. Not as a loan, not as charity, but as an investment in the life we're going to build together. I stared at the application materials, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden emergence of possibilities I had never dared to imagine. For 6 years, I had accepted that my education was over, that Dad's gambling had permanently derailed my future. Ashley, I can't ask you to sacrifice your savings for my mistakes. They weren't your mistakes, she replied firmly. You didn't choose to have your college fund stolen. You didn't choose to drop out. Those were choices your father made that affected your life. Mom, who had been quietly listening to these offers of support and opportunity, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about what you said the other night about needing to move out of this house. She looked around the living room that had been her home for 15 years with its family photos and comfortable furniture. I can't keep living in fear of Daniel's temper. I can't keep enabling his gambling by providing him with a stable home base while he destroys our finances. Grandmother Alice nodded approvingly. I've been hoping you would reach that conclusion on your own. There's an apartment complex near the university that offers month-to-month leases. Mom continued. Small places but clean and safe. If you're going back to school and working at Richard's firm, maybe we could share expenses for a while. The possibility of starting fresh away from the chaos and deception that had defined our family life felt like emerging from a cave into sunlight. For the first time in years, I could envision a future that wasn't dominated by Dad's addiction and the lies required to hide it. Ashley reached across the table and took my hand. You don't have to decide everything today, but you do have options now. Real options based on what you actually want instead of what circumstances force on you. As we sat in the living room making tentative plans for a different kind of life, I realized that Dad's explosion at Thanksgiving dinner had inadvertently created exactly what I needed. Most a support system based on truth instead of fiction. For 6 years, I had been trapped by Dad's lies, unable to ask for help because everyone believed I was already successful. Now, with the truth finally exposed, people who genuinely cared about me were stepping forward with concrete assistance and real opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad's worst moment of anger had become the catalyst for the best possibilities I'd seen since dropping out of college. 6 months later, I barely recognized my own life. The transformation felt so dramatic that sometimes I wondered if I was living in someone else's reality. I sat in my small office at Uncle Richard's law firm reviewing case files for a workers' compensation hearing when my phone buzzed with a text message from my academic advisor at Colorado State Global. Congratulations, Arlo. Your GPA for spring semester is 3.8. You're on track to graduate summa cum laude in December. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Summa cum laude. The academic achievement Dad had fabricated years earlier was becoming a real possibility through my own efforts. The paralegal position had exceeded every expectation. Uncle Richard's law firm specialized in employment law and family financial cases, which meant I was learning about issues directly relevant to my own experiences. More importantly, I was working with attorneys who treated me as a valued colleague rather than a charity case. Patterson called Jennifer Martinez one of the senior partners. "Could you review the documentation in the Henderson gambling addiction case? Your insights on family financial patterns have been incredibly helpful." The irony wasn't lost on me that my personal experience with Dad's gambling addiction had become professional expertise. I had helped 3 different families navigate the legal complexities of financial abuse and addiction recovery, using knowledge I had gained through painful first-hand experience. Ashley knocked on my office door frame. She had started bringing lunch to my office twice a week, partly to see me, but mostly because she was proud of the work I was doing and wanted to be part of my new life. "How's the evening class schedule working out?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Challenging but manageable," I replied honestly. "Constitutional law 3 nights a week plus online coursework for business ethics. The combination of practical experience here and academic theory is incredible." We had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the university campus, splitting expenses and creating a stable home environment that neither of us had experienced before. Ashley's nursing schedule complemented my law firm hours perfectly, and we had established routines that felt mature and sustainable. "Speaking of challenging," Ashley said, her expression becoming more serious, "your mom called. Your dad wants to meet with you." The mention of Dad still created a complex mixture of emotions. He had completed a 90-day inpatient gambling addiction treatment program at a facility in Colorado Springs, but recovery was proving more complicated than anyone had anticipated. "Did he say what he wants to discuss?" I asked. "Apparently, he's been working with a counselor on making amends to family members he's hurt. It's part of his recovery program." I had been expecting this conversation for months, but I still felt unprepared for it. Dad's treatment had been mandated by Uncle Richard after the family discovered the full extent of his debts and the threats from private lenders. The choice had been simple: get professional help or face legal consequences for the financial crimes he had committed. "I'm not ready to forgive him," I said honestly. "I know recovery programs emphasize making amends, but I need to see sustained behavioral change, not just words." Ashley nodded understandingly. "That's completely reasonable. You get to set the timeline for rebuilding trust." That evening, I drove to Mom's new apartment for our weekly dinner. She had been thriving in her independence, attending therapy sessions and rediscovering interests she had abandoned during years of managing Dad's addiction and volatile moods. "You look good," I observed as she served homemade lasagna. "Rested." "I feel good," she replied, her voice carrying a confidence that had been absent for years. "Dr. Martinez says I was showing classic signs of codependency and chronic stress. Living separately from your father has allowed me to remember who I am beyond just managing his problems." She had started dating someone new, a gentleman named David, who worked as a librarian, and treated her with kindness she had forgotten was possible. Their relationship was progressing slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than crisis management and damage control. "David wants to meet you soon," Mom said, "but only when you're ready. He understands this family has been through significant trauma." The description of our experiences as trauma had taken some adjustment. For years, I had minimized Dad's behavior as stress or bad luck, rather than recognizing it as a pattern of abuse. Therapy, both individual and family sessions, had helped me understand that financial abuse and emotional manipulation created lasting psychological effects. My phone rang as we were finishing dinner. Cousin Jake's name appeared on the screen, which was becoming increasingly common. Our relationship had transformed completely since the truth came out about Dad's deceptions. "Arlo, I just got accepted to graduate school." Jake's excitement was infectious. Master's program in educational counseling at University of Denver. That's fantastic. What changed your mind about going back to school? Honestly, watching you rebuild your life gave me courage to pursue something meaningful instead of settling for safe choices, he replied. I realized I had been making decisions based on fear and comparison rather than what actually interested me. Jake had been one of the unexpected beneficiaries of our family crisis. Learning that my supposed achievements had been fictional freed him from feelings of inadequacy that had paralyzed his career development for years. Emma called yesterday, he continued. She's switching her medical specialty to addiction medicine. She says our family's experience showed her how gambling addiction destroys families, and she wants to help people get treatment before they reach Dad's level of crisis. The ripple effects of that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner continued to reshape our entire extended family. People were making life decisions based on authentic motivations rather than competitive pressure or fabricated expectations. Uncle Mark mentioned that you're considering law school applications, Jake said. Harvard, Stanford, University of Colorado. The possibility still felt surreal. My academic performance and practical experience had earned recommendations from professors and attorneys who believed I had potential for legal education at the highest levels. I'm taking the LSAT in August, I confirmed. Jennifer Martinez thinks my combination of real-world experience and academic achievement could make me competitive for top programs. From deadweight to law school candidate in 18 months, Jake mused. That's one hell of a comeback story. Later that evening, Ashley and I walked through Washington Park discussing our future together. We had started talking about marriage, but both of us wanted to ensure our relationship was built on solid foundations rather than crisis bonding. I've been thinking about Dad's letter, I told her. Dad had written me a lengthy apology during his treatment program, acknowledging his failures and asking for the opportunity to rebuild our relationship. What did you decide? Ashley asked. I'll meet with him, but on my terms, in a public place with clear boundaries about what I'm willing to discuss. That sounds reasonable, she agreed. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the damage didn't happen. We paused near the lake, watching the sun set behind the mountains. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our family had ultimately created opportunities for authentic relationships and personal growth. I got the promotion at the hospital, Ashley announced, her voice filled with pride. Nurse supervisor for the cardiac unit. Ashley, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I wanted to wait until we were alone, she replied. With everything positive happening in your career and education, I didn't want it to feel like we were competing. I pulled her into a hug, realizing how different this relationship was from the dynamics I had witnessed growing up. Ashley and I celebrated each other's achievements instead of using them as weapons in psychological warfare. We're building something real, I said. Something based on truth instead of performance. As we walked home through the familiar Denver neighborhood that had become our new beginning, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that moment when I decided to stop protecting Dad's lies. The courage to tell the truth had been the first step toward claiming a future that actually belonged to me. 2 years later, I stood in Uncle Richard's dining room adjusting my law school interview suit while family members gathered for another Thanksgiving dinner. But this celebration felt fundamentally different from the disaster that had exploded our family dynamics 24 months earlier. The mahogany table, now in a different house with a healthier family dynamic, was set for a group of people who had learned to value honesty over appearances. You nervous about the Harvard interview next week? Emma asked as she helped grandmother Alice with her plate. Emma was now in her 3rd year of medical school, specializing in addiction medicine, and her confidence had blossomed since she stopped comparing herself to fictional achievements. Nervous, but prepared, I replied honestly. My LSAT scores and undergraduate GPA exceeded expectations, but more importantly, I understand why I want to study law. The past 2 years had crystallized my career goals in ways I never could have imagined during my warehouse and pizza delivery period. Working as a paralegal had shown me how legal knowledge could protect vulnerable families from financial predators and abusive situations. I wanted to specialize in family law and addiction recovery, using my personal experience to help others navigate similar crises. Ashley squeezed my hand under the table. We had gotten engaged 3 months earlier, planning a wedding for next summer that would be paid for with money we had saved together rather than borrowed from family or charged to credit cards. Our relationship had become a model of financial responsibility and emotional honesty that even impressed our therapist. "David's bringing the dessert," Mom announced as she bustled between the kitchen and dining room. She had remarried 6 months earlier, choosing a man whose kindness and stability provided everything Dad's volatility had lacked. David treated her like a treasured partner rather than a crisis management assistant. "How's school going, David?" Jake asked as Mom's new husband arrived carrying a homemade apple pie. "Fascinating," David replied enthusiastically. Library science might sound boring, but information literacy is becoming crucial as more families face financial scams and predatory lending. David's perspective on information and education had influenced Mom's own growth. She had started taking college courses for the first time in her life, exploring interests she had abandoned decades earlier, when marriage and motherhood consumed her identity. Dad arrived last carrying flowers for Mom and a wrapped gift that he placed carefully on the side table without fanfare. His presence at family gatherings was still somewhat tentative earned, rather than assumed based on 18 months of consistent behavioral change, rather than promises and apologies. "How's the hardware store job working out?" Daniel, Uncle Mark asked with genuine interest rather than competitive comparison. "Good days and challenging days," Dad replied honestly. "Manual work keeps me grounded, and the steady paycheck helps with restitution payments." Dad's transformation had been the most dramatic of anyone's. Gambling addiction treatment had been only the beginning of a complete life restructuring. He now attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week, worked with a financial counselor to manage debt repayment, and participated in family therapy to address the emotional damage his addiction had caused. "I made the final payment to Arlo this week," Dad announced quietly. "The college fund is fully repaid, plus interest." The statement represented more than just financial restitution. Dad had been paying me back $50 each month for 2 years, money that came from his part-time weekend work at a home improvement store. Each payment represented acknowledgement of the damage he had caused and commitment to making tangible amends. "That means a lot, Dad," I replied, and I meant it. The money itself mattered less than the consistent demonstration that he understood the consequences of his actions and was willing to sacrifice his own comfort to repair them. Grandmother Alice now, 91 but still sharp as a courtroom cross-examination, raised her water glass in a toast. "I want to acknowledge how proud I am of this family's ability to heal from crisis." She looked around the table at each of us. 2 years ago, we were built on lies and competitive pressure. Today, we're built on truth and mutual support. The transformation had rippled through our entire extended family structure. Uncle Mark's medical practice now included consultation for families dealing with gambling addiction. Uncle Richard's law firm had developed expertise in financial abuse cases. Cousin Emma was pioneering research on family trauma and recovery. Jake had become a school counselor, specializing in adolescent anxiety and family pressure. "Arlo," Grandmother Alice continued, "I want you to know that your courage to tell the truth that Thanksgiving night changed all of our lives for the better. The recognition felt meaningful because it came from someone whose judgment I respected completely." Grandmother Alice had lived through the Great Depression, raised 3 sons as a single mother after Grandfather William's death, and built a successful career as a businesswoman when few women had such opportunities. "I've been reflecting on that night frequently," I replied. I almost didn't say anything. I was so tired of protecting lies that I was tempted to just leave quietly and cut contact with the family entirely. "What stopped you?" Emma asked. "Ashley, actually," I admitted, glancing at my fiancé. "She convinced me that people can't change behaviors they don't acknowledge, and families can't heal from secrets they don't discuss." Ashley smiled at the memory. I told him that the truth might hurt initially, but lies hurt continuously. Crisis creates opportunity for authentic relationships if people choose courage over comfort. Dad's response surprised everyone. She was right, and I'm grateful now that you forced the confrontation. If you had just disappeared quietly, I would have continued gambling, lying, and destroying relationships indefinitely. His acknowledgement represented genuine insight rather than manipulation. Dad's recovery program had taught him to recognize patterns of denial and rationalization that had enabled his destructive behavior for years. The hardest part, Dad continued, was realizing how my addiction had poisoned every family relationship, not just our father-son dynamic. I wasn't just stealing from Arlo's future. I was manipulating everyone's emotions and creating false expectations. Uncle Richard nodded approvingly. Recovery requires complete honesty about consequences, not just the behavior itself. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed naturally between career updates, relationship news, and future planning. Jake announced his engagement to a fellow graduate student. Emma discussed her research on adolescent addiction prevention. Mom shared her excitement about returning to college at 53 years old. The contrast with previous family gatherings was remarkable. Instead of performances designed to impress or compete, we shared genuine struggles and authentic achievements. Dad talked honestly about the ongoing challenges of addiction recovery. I discussed the pressure of law school applications and wedding planning. Everyone acknowledged that progress was imperfect but sustainable. I got accepted to University of Colorado Law School yesterday. I announced during dessert. Full scholarship plus a research assistantship focusing on family financial law. The celebration that erupted around the table felt genuine and supportive rather than competitive. Family members expressed pride without comparison to their own children's achievements. Dad's smile carried no trace of the desperate need for reflected glory that had driven his previous fabrications. "That's incredible, Arlo," Jake said enthusiastically. "You'll be Dr. Patterson in 3 years." "Or Attorney Patterson, technically," I corrected with a laugh. "Either way," Grandmother Alice observed, "you'll be helping families navigate legal challenges similar to what we experienced. Your education has real purpose now." As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the life lesson that had emerged from our family's crisis. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people you care about is refuse to enable destructive patterns, even when confrontation seems cruel in the moment. Dad's humiliation at that Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago had been necessary medicine that forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. His gambling addiction had created a web of lies that poisoned every family relationship, preventing authentic connection and mutual support. Ashley and I drove home through the familiar Denver streets that had witnessed our entire relationship's evolution, from crisis support to genuine partnership. We talked about wedding plans and career goals, but also about the family dynamics we wanted to create for our future children. "I want to make sure we never build relationships on performance or achievement," Ashley said as we pulled into our apartment complex. "What if our kids struggle academically or professionally? I want them to know they're valued for who they are, not what they accomplish." Her perspective reflected lessons we had both learned from our family's experience with deception and competitive pressure. Authentic relationships required accepting people's real circumstances rather than demanding impressive narratives. My phone buzzed with a text message from someone I didn't immediately recognize. "Hi, Arlo. This is Marcus Chen from your old warehouse job. I heard you're in law school now. My family is dealing with gambling debt and financial abuse. Could I ask you some questions about legal options?" I showed the message to Ashley, who smiled knowingly. "Looks like your experience is already helping other people." "I guess crisis can create expertise if you choose to learn from it instead of hiding from it," I replied. As I typed a response offering to meet Marcus for coffee and discuss resources for families dealing with gambling addiction, I realized that my journey from warehouse worker to law student had equipped me with knowledge and perspective that could benefit others facing similar challenges. The truth I had spoken at that Thanksgiving dinner had set in motion changes that extended far beyond our immediate family. By refusing to protect Dad's lies any longer, I had created opportunities for healing growth and authentic relationships that none of us had imagined possible. True success, I had learned, isn't measured by others' approval or fabricated achievements, but by the courage to live authentically and protect the people you love from destructive patterns, even when it requires painful honesty. Sometimes destroying comfortable lies is the only way to build relationships worth having. Have you ever been in a situation where telling the truth seemed more dangerous than protecting lies? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how families can support each other through addiction or financial crisis. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that recovery and authentic relationships are possible even after devastating betrayals. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that courage to face uncomfortable truths often leads to the most meaningful personal growth and family healing.